Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Nils, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Céline, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin.
Okay, so I just found out about this and I genuinely cannot believe nobody talks about it more. Like in school, they mentioned it. They said the plague happened and we moved on. But the more I read, the more I had to bring this here.
I have a feeling I know what we are talking about today.
The Black Death, and not in a textbook way. Imagine half the people you know are just gone kind of way.
Half, in some places more than half. And it happened in 6 years.
6 years. When COVID hit in 2020, the whole world shut down over a disease with a mortality rate of around 1%. The Black Death killed, depending on where you lived, somewhere between 30 and 60% of everyone, and in some places, much worse than that.
Before we go further, I think it is important we say this at the start. We are going to be talking about mass death, about communities being wiped out, about people being killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is not a light episode.
No, it is not.
Exactly, and I want to do it justice because these were real people, regular people, farmers and merchants, priests and children.
And today, we are going to take you inside that world. Inside the streets, the ships, the hospital wards, inside the decisions that were made and the decisions that could not be unmade.
But first, Nils, you have something with you today, I noticed.
I do. Something I picked up on a research trip to Italy a few years ago. Let me describe it to you. It is ceramic, cylindrical, about the height of your forearm. The glaze is a deep, creamy white, introducing tin-glazed earthenware, and painted on the front in deep blue and orange is an inscription in Latin. The letters are slightly uneven, handwritten, essentially, in paint.
That sounds like a jar, like an old jar.
It is a kind of jar, yes. That is clue number 1, a ceramic jar, inscribed in Latin, made in Italy in the 14th or 15th century.
I have a guess already, but I am going to keep it to myself.
What does the Latin say?
Something about healing. That is all for now.
So, before we get to the disaster itself, can we spend a moment on the world it hit? Because I think context matters enormously here.
Absolutely. The Europe of the mid-14th century was a feudal society, which means... Ethan, tell me what that means to you.
Lords, peasants, castles. Like a hierarchy where people at the bottom basically worked for the people at the top. And that was just how it was?
Essentially. The peasants worked the land. The lords owned the land. The church owned enormous amounts of the land and also mediated between people and God. Everyone had their place, their duty, their obligations. It was a rigid, interlocking system that had been in place for centuries.
And medieval Europe in the early 1400s was, actually just before the plague, experiencing a kind of crisis already. There had been the Great Famine of 1315 to 1322, a decade of failed harvests, mass starvation, weakened populations. People were already struggling.
So they were already depleted when the plague hit?
In some ways, yes. The population had grown rapidly in the 12th and 13th centuries, too rapidly, perhaps, for the agricultural systems to support it. By the time the Black Death arrived, parts of Europe were already stretched.
Which made the population more vulnerable. A well-nourished, healthy population still would have been devastated by this disease, but a population weakened by years of malnutrition.
It was like piling on.
Yes. Let me take you there. It is the year 1338. You are in the Tian Shan mountains of Central Asia, the heartland of the ancient Silk Road. The grasslands stretch for hundreds of miles. Great colonies of burrowing rodents, marmots, gerbils, live in the earth beneath your feet.
Marmots like the big ground squirrels?
Exactly like that. And in the fleas that live on those marmots, something invisible is stirring. A bacterium. Yersinia pestis. A bacterium that has been circulating in these animal populations for centuries. occasionally spilling into humans, always being contained. Until now.
We know this because of modern archaeology. In 2022, researchers published a study examining burial sites in the Kyrgyzstan region, graves dated to 1338 and 1339. They found the DNA of Yersinia pestis in the skeletal remains, and the tombstones specifically mentioned pestilence.
So there is physical proof, like we have the actual evidence.
Actual ancient DNA evidence? Yes. The Black Death was already killing people in Central Asia almost a decade before it reached Europe.
And it moved westward along the Mongol trade networks. The Mongol Empire had created the greatest land-based trading system in history. The Silk Road that carried silk and spices and gold from East Asia to Europe also carried invisibly this bacterium.
So the very thing that connected the world, trade, is what spread the plague?
The very thing that made medieval civilization rich.
By 1345 and 1346, the plague had reached the territory of the Golden Horde, the Mongol Khanate that controlled the northern Black Sea region. And that is where a story begins that everyone who has studied the plague knows.
The Caffa story.
The Caffa story. Caffa, modern Feodosia in Crimea, was a Genoese trading post, a crucial node in the Silk Road network. In 1346, the Mongol forces of Khan Johnny Beg besieged the city, and those forces were dying of plague.
And according to an Italian notary named Gabriel de Musis, the Mongol commanders decided to use their plague dead as weapons. They loaded the bodies onto catapults and hurled them over the city walls.
They did what?
That is what de Musis wrote. The Genoese, he claimed, threw the bodies into the sea as fast as they could. But it was too late. The plague took hold inside Caffa, and when the survivors finally fled by ship, they carried it with them.
Now, we have to be honest here, because this is the kind of story that sounds amazing and terrible. De Musis was almost certainly not there. He never left Piacenza. He was writing from hearsay years later.
So we do not know if it happened.
We know the Mongol forces were suffering from plague. We know the Genoese were in the city. We know the plague reached Italy via ships from the Black Sea. What we cannot verify is the catapult story specifically.
And epidemiologists point out that hurling corpses over a wall is not a particularly efficient way to spread bubonic plague, which requires flea bites for transmission.
So it might be half true.
It is the kind of story that captures something real, the terror, the desperation, the fact that this plague was moving from east to west, even if the specific detail cannot be verified.
What we can say with certainty is this. In October 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina, and almost everyone aboard was dying.
The port authorities who went to inspect the ships found sailors covered in black boils, oozing blood and pus. Most of the crew were already dead. Those still alive were delirious with fever.
They ordered the ships out, right?
Immediately, the ships were ordered away from the harbor, but it was too late.
It was already too late.
Okay, so what was actually happening to people, like biologically?
Yersinia pestis is a bacterium. It lives in fleas, and fleas live on rats and on other rodents. When the rats began to die in large numbers, which you might expect to see as a warning sign, all these dead rats, the fleas jumped to human hosts.
The flea bites a person, injects the bacteria into the lymphatic system, and then
the bacteria begin to multiply rapidly. They produce proteins that suppress the immune response. They spread through the lymph nodes, and within 2 to 6 days, the victim develops a high fever, chills, vomiting, excruciating headache, and then the buboes appear.
The swelling.
Swellings in the groin, the armpits, the neck. Lymph nodes swelling to the size of an egg, black-purple, hot to the touch, agonizing.
This is the bubonic form, and without treatment, it kills between 50 and 60% of people who catch it.
Those are terrible odds.
But that was not the only form. There was also pneumonic plague. When the bacteria infected the lungs, this could spread directly between people through coughing and breathing. And it was faster. Death could come in 1 to 3 days.
And then there was septicemic plague, where the bacteria got directly into the bloodstream. The body's clotting system would fail, people would hemorrhage under the skin, tissue would die, fingers and toes would turn black.
That is where the name comes from, Black Death. From the black skin?
That and the bruising, the darkening. Though interestingly, medieval people did not call it the Black Death. They called it the Great Mortality. The name Black Death came later, probably from translations of Latin and German texts.
For medieval doctors, all of this was entirely mysterious. They had no microscopes, no concept of bacteria, no germ theory.
They had the miasma theory.
Which is bad air.
Exactly. The dominant medical thinking of the day held that disease was caused by miasma, noxious, corrupt air rising from rotting matter, swamps, the bodies of the dead. If you breathed bad air, you got sick.
So they were completely wrong about the cause?
Completely wrong. And the treatments they tried, bloodletting, burning aromatic herbs, dietary changes, prayer, addressed the miasma theory, not the bacterium.
Plague doctors wore those extraordinary costumes you sometimes see in pictures. Long robes, gloves, a wide-brimmed hat, and that beaked mask stuffed with aromatic herbs and flowers.
To filter the bad air.
To filter what they thought was bad air. In some cases, the beak may have accidentally reduced their exposure to pneumonic plague, but the theory was wrong.
And there were also remarkable exceptions. One remarkable exception. But we will come to that person.
So from Messina in October 1347, how fast did it move?
Within months, it had reached the major trading cities of northern Italy: Venice, Genoa, Florence, Pisa. And these were the most densely populated, most commercially connected cities in Europe.
Venice was losing 600 people a day at the height of the outbreak.
600 a day?
Per day, Florence, one of the wealthiest cities in Europe, may have lost between half and 3/4 of its population. The writer Giovanni Boccaccio survived it there and wrote about what he witnessed. He described corpses piled in the streets. He described people walking around one morning perfectly healthy, eating dinner with friends, and being dead by nightfall.
From Italy, the plague moved north and west. By early 1348, it was in southern France and the Iberian Peninsula. By mid-1348, it was throughout France. The daughter of the King of Castile, Princess Joan of England, died from it in Bordeaux while traveling to meet her betrothed.
A king's daughter.
The plague did not care who you were.
By late 1348, it had reached England, and by 1349, it had reached Scotland. Scotland's story is one I think about often. Scottish soldiers had been massing on the border with England in early 1349, hoping actually to take advantage of what they thought would be English weakness. The English were being devastated by this terrible new disease, a moment to strike.
And then
the plague arrived among the Scottish forces themselves. They returned home carrying it, and by the end of 1349, Scotland was in catastrophe. The contemporary chroniclers John of Fordun and Andro of Winton wrote that approximately 1/3 of Scotland's population died. Some modern estimates put it higher.
The plague reached Scandinavia in 1349 as well. It came to Bergen in Norway via a ship from England in late summer. The Norwegian term is svartedauden, the Black Death.
Norway got hit really hard, did it not?
Norway lost somewhere between 50 and 60% of its population. More than half, perhaps 6 in every 10 people in Norway died.
That is incomprehensible.
Try to imagine your school. Imagine 6 out of every 10 students are gone. Your street, 6 out of 10 houses empty. Your town. That is what 1349 did to Norway. And the country, the farms, the communities, the Norse dialects spoken in mountain valleys, would not recover for 200 years, in some cases longer.
Sweden lost at least a third and possibly half its population and would not recover for 300 years, according to some historians. The entire fabric of Scandinavian society was torn.
Second clue.
Yes, so this jar, I want to tell you where it would have sat, in a medieval apothecary's shop, a chemist's, on a shelf alongside dozens of identical or similar jars, each labeled in Latin. Inside this jar, there would have been something. A herb, a preparation. Perhaps theriac, a compound mixture of dozens of ingredients that was considered the great antidote to poison and plague alike. Perhaps rosewater, perhaps powdered pearls.
Wait, powdered pearls for medicine?
Entirely standard medieval pharmacy, and genuinely useless against plague, but the apothecaries were doing everything they could with the knowledge they had.
This jar is called an albarello, a maiolica drug jar, tin-glazed earthenware made in the Italian tradition. Real examples survive in museums across Europe, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Hunt Museum in Ireland.
So these are real?
Real and significant. When plague struck, apothecaries were among the first people communities turned to. They mixed and prepared what medicines existed. They were the front line of a medical system that had no answers, but kept trying anyway. Keep that in mind. Third clue coming.
Can we talk about what it was actually like for ordinary people, not just the numbers?
The chronicler I mentioned earlier, John Clyn of Kilkenny in Ireland, he was a Franciscan friar. He kept a record as the plague swept through his community. He documented death after death. He watched his fellow friars die around him.
And at the end of his manuscript, this is one of the most remarkable things to survive from the entire Black Death. He wrote that he was leaving blank pages, in case anyone should still be alive and any son of Adam can escape this pestilence and carry on the work thus begun.
He thought he might be the last person.
He thought he might be one of the last people alive.
He died shortly after writing those words. The manuscript was found. Someone else picked it up and added a single line, and here the author seems to have died.
That is one of the saddest things I have ever heard.
It is, and it captures something real about what the Black Death did to the sense of the world. People did not know what was happening. They did not know when it would end. They did not know if it would end. They were just in the middle of something incomprehensible.
And into that incomprehensible darkness, one figure stands out, a figure who is not European, who was not in the epicenter of the devastation, but who looked at what was happening and understood it more clearly than almost anyone else in the world.
Who?
His name was Ibn al-Khatib, and I want you to remember that name.
He was a Moorish physician, poet, historian, and politician, born in the Emirate of Granada, in what is now southern Spain, in 1313. A brilliant, restless, polymath mind.
When the plague reached Granada in 1348 and 1349, Ibn al-Khatib did not do what every other medical authority of his time did. He did not reach for the miasma theory. He did not invoke divine punishment. He looked at what was actually happening.
What did he see?
He saw patterns. He noticed that communities that had no contact with infected persons survived. Communities that isolated themselves survived. People who handled the clothing or belongings of plague victims got sick. People who maintained strict distance did not.
And from these observations, he drew a conclusion. The plague spread through contagion, person to person, object to object. 500 years before Louis Pasteur developed germ theory. 500 years before anyone understood what a bacterium was.
He figured it out just by watching?
Just by watching. By being rigorous. And by having the courage to follow the evidence wherever it led, even when it contradicted the theological orthodoxy of his day, because the prevailing Islamic interpretation held that the plague was divine punishment and that fleeing from it was an act of faithlessness.
Ibn al-Khatib acknowledged this tension directly in his writing. He knew he was contradicting received wisdom. He argued anyway.
He was the only Muslim scholar of his time to make this argument. He was virtually alone among scholars in any tradition in arguing for contagion. His work attracted attention centuries later precisely because of how exceptional it was.
What happened to him?
He was accused of heresy. He died in prison in Fez around 1374 or 1375, possibly murdered. A man who was 500 years ahead of his time in understanding how infectious disease spreads, died in prison for saying so.
Remember Ibn al-Khatib. Remember the name.
Remember Ibn al-Khatib. There is something we must address directly, because it happened, and it was a catastrophe within the catastrophe.
Yes.
As the plague spread and the deaths accumulated and no explanation made sense, some communities turned their grief and terror into violence against Jewish communities.
The well-poisoning accusation.
An accusation with absolutely no basis in truth. The claim spread in the Rhineland, across France, through Switzerland, that Jewish people had deliberately poisoned wells in order to spread the plague.
The fact that Jewish communities were dying from the plague at the same rate as Christian communities, a point that Pope Clement VI himself made in his condemnations, made no difference.
Pope Clement VI condemned it?
He issued 2 papal bulls. He argued directly against the logic of the accusation. He threatened excommunication. It made very little difference in the places where the violence was happening.
In Strasbourg, on the 14th of February, 1349, before the plague had even fully arrived in the city, the entire Jewish community of approximately 2,000 people was burned to death, publicly, organized by city authorities.
Before the plague even arrived?
Before it arrived, the accusation was a pretext. The violence had been waiting for an excuse.
In Basel, in January of that same year, the Jewish community was rounded up, locked in a wooden building on an island in the Rhine, and burned. In Erfurt, in March 1349, thousands were killed. The Rhineland city of Worms saw something even more terrible. The Jewish community there, facing the choice between massacre and death on their own terms, reportedly chose to die by their own hand rather than face the mob.
This violence had consequences that lasted for centuries. Entire communities of Central Europe that had existed for generations were destroyed. Survivors fled east into Poland and Lithuania, which is one reason why those regions had such large Jewish populations in the centuries that followed.
The Black Death did not cause anti-Semitism, but it unleashed it, and the people who died were real. They had names, families, communities, histories. They deserve to be named in every account of this period.
They do. So there were also, I read about this, people who were literally beating themselves in the streets?
The flagellants. Yes, groups of devout Christians who believed that by publicly scourging themselves, beating themselves with leather whips, sometimes with metal spikes, they could demonstrate sufficient penance to God and end the plague.
The movement started in Hungary and spread through Germany and into the Low Countries, France, Sweden, and Poland.
Groups of hundreds, sometimes thousands. They would travel town to town, strip to the waist in public squares, beat themselves until they bled, sing hymns.
That is, I do not know whether that is terrifying or heartbreaking or both.
Both, I think. These were people in genuine despair, people who had watched their families die, people for whom no explanation made sense. And this was a way of doing something, of acting, of demonstrating that they were willing to suffer.
But the movement also had a darker side. The flagellants began to claim that their self-inflicted suffering made the sacraments unnecessary, that they did not need the church to mediate between themselves and God. Some claimed they had achieved a special holiness,
which the church would not have liked.
Pope Clement VI condemned the movement by papal bull on the 20th of October, 1349. He ordered church leaders across France, Germany, Poland, Sweden, and England to suppress the processions. He had the support of the University of Paris, which had petitioned him to act.
The flagellant movement was also connected to the Jewish persecution. Flagellant processions often incited violence against Jewish communities as they passed through towns.
People in terror and grief can do terrible things. The flagellants were not monsters, but in their processions they sometimes left trails of devastation. All right, the final clue.
I think I know what it is.
In the middle of a city under plague, where priests were refusing to enter houses where the dying lay, where some doctors had fled, where families were abandoning their own sick, etc., there were people who stayed.
The apothecaries.
The apothecaries, and not just apothecaries, women who served as nurses, herbalists, people who ground and measured and mixed and applied and sat at bedsides. They had no cure, but they had care, and they had these care. This is an albarello, a medieval apothecary drug jar. Real examples survive in museums across Europe. The inscription on mine reads theriac. Theriac, the great medieval antidote, a compound of sometimes dozens of ingredients that physicians prescribed against every form of poison and disease, including plague.
Did it work?
No, the theriac did not stop the plague, but what it represents is the refusal to give up. The people who stood at those shelves, who labeled those jars, who went into houses where everyone else feared to go. They were doing what they could with what they had.
That is actually kind of beautiful in a heartbreaking way.
History is full of that, the beautiful and the heartbreaking, together. Now, let us talk about what came after, because the Black Death did not only destroy, it also, in the most painful possible way, created.
The labor thing, right? Peasants getting more power?
Exactly. Think about feudal society. The entire system was premised on peasants being in surplus. Lords could compel their service because peasants had no alternatives and no leverage.
And then half of them die.
And then half of them die. The surviving peasants are suddenly enormously valuable. Their labor is scarce. Lords who want their lands worked have to offer wages, better conditions. Peasants who had never had bargaining power suddenly have some.
So the plague accidentally created workers' rights?
The English government tried to prevent exactly that. They passed the Ordinance of Laborers in 1349 and the Statute of Laborers in 1351, legislation that attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and force peasants to stay on their lords' lands.
Did it work?
It did not work because you cannot legislate against economics. The labor market had changed. The law was widely ignored. Peasants moved, wages rose anyway.
And that simmering resentment, the gap between the life that was now economically possible and the legal structure that still tried to keep peasants in serfdom, that resentment found expression 30 years later.
The peasants' revolt?
1381. Wat Tyler, John Ball, the rebel preacher who asked, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" Tens of thousands marching on London. King Richard II, he was only 14 years old, meeting with them.
The revolt was suppressed. Wat Tyler was killed. The promises made were revoked. But serfdom, legal serfdom, villanage, declined and largely disappeared from England over the following decades. The Black Death did not cause this single-handedly, but it set it in motion.
So the Black Death helped end feudalism?
It accelerated the collapse of a system that was already under pressure. Yes, the world that emerged from the Black Death was structurally different from the one that preceded it, more mobile, more economically dynamic, more, cautiously, open to the idea that ordinary people had value.
The church suffered enormously. In England, around 40% of parish clergy died. 3 archbishops of Canterbury died in rapid succession in 1348 and 1349.
3 archbishops in a year?
In some monasteries and convents, the death rate was even higher. In the worst affected religious houses, virtually the entire community died.
The church tried to replace the dead clergy quickly, lowering the minimum age of ordination from 25 to 20, which produced a generation of young, inexperienced, sometimes poorly trained priests.
Which further eroded public confidence.
So people were already questioning the church's ability to help them?
And the church's ability to explain what was happening. If God was all-powerful and all good, why? Why this? Why the children? Why the good people, as well as the sinners? The theological answers that existed, the plague as punishment for sin, were inadequate, and people knew they were inadequate.
The seeds of the Reformation, 150 years later, were partly planted in this soil.
And out of this transformed relationship with death came one of the most extraordinary artistic traditions in European history, the danse macabre, the dance of death.
I have seen pictures of this. Skeletons dancing with kings and bishops.
Exactly. Death himself, depicted as a skeleton, leads representatives from every rank of society in a dance to the grave. The Pope, the Emperor, the merchant, the soldier, the peasant, the infant. Death makes no exceptions.
The message was egalitarian in the most radical possible way. No wealth, no title, no holiness exempts you.
The earliest major danse macabre we know of was a mural painted at the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents in Paris around 1424 to 1425, but the tradition spread across Europe: murals, woodcuts, printed books, theatrical performances.
And it came out of the plague?
It came out of a generation that had lived alongside mass death for so long that it had become part of the texture of ordinary life. When death is everywhere, you make art about death. You make it into something you can look at, something you can understand.
I find it strangely moving, actually. There is something honest about it. Medieval Europe after the Black Death looked at death clearly, unflinchingly, and made it beautiful in its way.
Okay, so, you both know what time it is.
Choose your own history.
So Nils and Céline and I have been talking about this, and we want to put you in a real moment, a real decision, one that actually happened, or rather, a decision that was made, and you get to decide if it was the right one.
The place is the harbor of Messina, Sicily. The month is October 1347. You are the harbourmaster, the most powerful port official in the city.
12 Genoese trading ships have come in from the Black Sea. You go out to inspect them, and what you find is horrifying. Most of the sailors are dead. Those still alive are covered in black swellings, oozing blood. They are barely conscious.
Here's the thing. Messina is a trading port. Its entire economy depends on the Genoese trade. These ships carry cargo, goods that the city's merchants have been waiting for. The Genoese are powerful people. Their relationship with Messina matters.
And you do not know yet what this disease is. You have never seen it before. You just know that the sailors look terribly ill.
So the question is, what do you do?
Option 1, you quarantine the ships. You refuse to let anyone disembark. You forbid the cargo to be unloaded. You send word to the city authorities and wait for instructions. The economic consequences will be significant. The Genoese will be furious.
Option 2, you let the ships dock normally. You allow the cargo to be unloaded. The sailors who are well enough can come ashore. The economy continues. You report the sick sailors to the doctors and hope for the best.
What would you do?
I think, and I know what actually happened, but if I imagine myself there, in that moment, with no knowledge of what this disease was, the economic pressure would be immense. The Genoese connections were not trivial.
I think I would quarantine. I would look at those bodies and think, no. Whatever this is, it is not normal sickness. Something is very wrong here.
What the harbourmaster did. He ordered the ships out of harbor. He turned them away. That was the right decision.
But it did not work, did it?
It did not work, because the decision came too late. The ships had already been in the harbor long enough. Some contact had already occurred. The plague was already in Messina before the ships were expelled.
And there is a lesson there that is almost unbearable. Acting rightly, decisively, bravely against economic pressure was not enough, because the window had already closed.
And I think this is one of the things the Black Death teaches us about pandemics. The window in which decisive action can prevent disaster is often much shorter than it feels. By the time the danger is visible enough that everyone agrees something must be done, it is often already too late to prevent it.
We kind of learned that again, did we not, in 2020?
We did.
For a long time, some historians actually debated whether the Black Death was caused by bubonic plague at all. There were alternative theories: anthrax, hemorrhagic fever, some unknown extinct disease.
Were those theories serious?
Some of them were serious scholarship. The plague spread faster than expected for a flea-borne disease. The symptoms did not always match perfectly with modern bubonic plague. These were reasonable questions.
And then ancient DNA answered them.
In 2000, the French researcher Didier Raoult extracted DNA from the teeth of Black Death victims from a mass grave in Montpellier, France. He found Yersinia pestis DNA. First time it had been confirmed at the molecular level.
And then, in 2011, a team from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published a complete genome reconstruction of Yersinia pestis from skeletal remains at East Smithfield in London.
That is the emergency cemetery?
The emergency cemetery established in 1348 to 1350. It received more than 2,000 bodies. At the height of the outbreak, more than 200 bodies were being buried there per day.
The genome reconstruction was published in the journal Nature. The result was clear. The pathogen was unambiguously Yersinia pestis, and the Black Death strain was ancestral to virtually all modern plague lineages.
So every plague outbreak since it descended from the Black Death?
The researchers described it as the mother of all plagues. And the researchers who reviewed this body of evidence across all the studies summarized their conclusion in 3 words. Finally, plague is plague.
I love that. Finally, plague is plague.
The recovery was agonizingly slow, and the reason for that is not simply the scale of the initial disaster, though that was catastrophic enough. It is that the plague did not leave.
It kept coming back?
In England, major returns of plague struck in 1361 to 62, 1369, 1374 to 75, and 1390. Each wave hit a population that had barely begun to recover from the last.
Europe's pre-plague population of roughly 75 million people was not restored until approximately the year 1500, 150 years after the initial catastrophe.
150 years.
In Norway, where the losses were the most severe, some historians believe full demographic recovery did not come until the 17th century, 300 years.
300 years. For 3 centuries, Norway lived with the demographic shadow of 1349.
And in that time, what was it like for the survivors and their children and grandchildren?
Complex. On one hand, and this is strange to say, the survivors, and especially the laborers among them, had more economic power than their grandparents ever had. Wages were higher, land was cheaper, mobility was greater. The feudal cage was weakening.
On the other hand, communities had been shattered. Knowledge had been lost. Skilled craftsmen who had died had taken their expertise with them. Monasteries that had once been centers of learning and art had lost most of their inhabitants.
There is a theory that the Renaissance, the explosion of art, learning, and humanism in 15th century Italy, was partly fertilized by the Black Death. The concentration of wealth in fewer hands created patrons with capital to spend. The shattering of old certainties created space for new ideas.
So the Black Death might have helped cause the Renaissance?
Not caused. It is too simple to say caused, but contributed to the conditions, created the pressure that broke old structures and allowed new ones to emerge. History does not have simple cause and effect chains. It has pressures and ruptures, and the spaces that ruptures create.
Can we take a moment to just sit with all of this?
Of course.
I came into this episode kind of shocked that nobody talks about it more, and now I think I understand why it is hard to talk about. It is too big. It is not one story. It is millions of stories. John Clean leaving blank pages in case someone was still alive. Ibn al-Khatib sitting in Granada and figuring out the truth and getting imprisoned for it. 2,000 people in Strasbourg burned to death before the plague even arrived. The harbourmaster of Messina making the right call too late.
The Albarello on the apothecary shelf. The herbalist going into the house when everyone else had fled.
The Norse farmer in the Tian Shan Valley, whose grave archaeologists found in 2022, whose tombstone said pestilence, who died in 1338 before Europe even knew the word was coming.
I keep thinking about what it did to faith. Not destroyed it. Most people remained deeply religious after the plague, but it changed the quality of faith. It made it more personal, more intimate, less mediated by institution. In some ways, it made European Christians more individualistic in their relationship with God.
And the danse macabre. I think about the danse macabre, not as gloomy art, but as a kind of courage. The courage to look directly at death, to paint it, to make it part of the beauty of the world.
I look at stuff like this, and I think about how it connects to COVID, which I know is not the same scale, but the questions, who do we blame when we are scared? Do the institutions we trust actually protect us? What do we do when there is no treatment, and we do not understand what is happening? Those questions are not 14th century questions. They are human questions, every generation.
Every generation, yes.
And every generation also produces people like Ibn al-Khatib, people who, in the middle of the chaos, refuse to give up on evidence, on observation, on the slow, uncomfortable work of understanding the truth.
I do not know, but can I ask? Do you think that is what gives history its power? Not just the tragedies, but the people who kept going inside them?
Yes, I do.
Me too.
So, we have walked through the Tian Shan grasslands in 1338. We have stood on the docks of Messina in 1347. We have sat with the apothecary at their shelves of Albarello jars, the flagellants in the streets of the Rhineland, the families of Bergen and Strasbourg and Florence and Kilkenny. We have remembered Ibn al-Khatib. We have remembered the harbourmaster. We have remembered the 2000 of Strasbourg. We have remembered John Klyn and his blank pages.
And we have not looked away.
History demands that we do not look away, not from the worst of what human beings have done to each other in their terror, not from the best of what they have done for each other in their courage. The Black Death was the greatest catastrophe in the recorded history of Europe, and the world that came after it, imperfect, scarred, transformed, is the world that built the foundations of the modern age.
Remember the people who lived through it. Remember the ones who did not.
Until our next journey through time, keep history alive. You know, everything we talked about today, the catastrophe, the survival, the slow rebuilding, it reminds me that the most enduring things are not built in moments of ease. They are built in the aftermath, when people looked at what was left and decided to create something lasting from it. That is why I want to tell you about our partner, Cyprus Real Returns. Because after so much destruction, the story of recovery is also a story of strategic choices about where to put down roots, where to build something that will last. Cyprus Real Returns offers exactly that kind of strategic security, guaranteed 6 to 12% returns on Cyprus real estate, and 100% secured through the Cyprus Land Registry. Not a promise in the air, a foundation in the ground. Professional management handles everything. The assets are protected. And Cyprus itself, with tourism booming and property values growing nearly 8% annually, is one of the most resilient markets in the Mediterranean. The people who survived the Black Death rebuilt. They planted. They laid foundations their grandchildren would inherit. That instinct to build something lasting out of uncertainty. That is what Cyprus Real Returns is about. Visit cyprusrealreturns.com to learn more.